Hi dear colleagues, I would like to present you our paper on emotional street network. Why study city streets as emotional network? This is because the city streets are natural emotional contexts in the city space. They are the major public space, and having livable streets have been thought and proclaimed by many urban researchers and urban developers as an utmost value. City streets provide people with numerous versions and options for getting to know each other, for interaction, for different kinds of experiences, either good or bad. At the same time, we know that emotions of the people are not actually localized in one city spot, but are durable and are felt on the go. That is why the research question for this paper was how to actually grasp the structure of the built environment behind the emotional experience of the city space. And to do this, we have came up with a concept of emotional street network, which is quite similar to the classical concept of a street network, which is an interconnected system of the streets. But aside of this, it is the system which is also charged with emotions people feel on the go. So an emotional street network would be the networks of emotionally interconnected streets, not only structurally, but also in terms of practice and experiences they provide to the people. And we also understand the emotions occurring on the go when the people flow along the streets. This is how we actually experience the city, along the city streets. And to make our research, we employed an instrument which was based on the concept by Paul Eggman, the concept of basic emotions. There are actually 6 of them, but here on the picture you see 5. There is also surprise coming up with this. So there is one a positive emotion of joy, and another one semi-positive, semi-negative emotion of surprise, and also 4 negative emotions of sadness, anger, disgust, and fear. And this concept was inserted into the tool which we have elaborated in our laboratory and which we are using for this kind of emotional mapping of the city. It is called Empresa T, and it's actually public participation geoinformational system. So actually an interactive map where a registered user can leave an emotion of 6 types. And here you see the heat map of the emotion of joy. As you see, the heat map shows the circles where the joy is mostly clustered. And this is the map of St. Petersburg for those of you who have not yet understood this. So Empresa T is a tool which has been functioning for several years now, and through it we have collected quite a sample of emotions for St. Petersburg. This is our sample, and it's actually more than 2,000 emoji, and these are emotional marks of 6 types, and also some of the users leave comments to these emotions. And for the social demographics, we can say who are our users in terms of gender. These are predominantly female users. And the emotions were put for 700 unique sites, And as you see, 60% of emotional marks are those of joy. And here is the heat map, which we compiled out of positive emotion of joy and surprise, and out of negative emotions. So from the heat map, which is a classical representation of the geographical information in social geography and economic geography, in urban studies, we see that the spatial distribution of emotions is quite different. The positive emotion goes a triangle shape and is mostly clustered along the north-southern direction, while the negative emotions are clustered in an L shape and are heading actually to the north and to the east mostly. So from this distribution, we see that the emotions of joy, the positive emotions, are tending to be clustered more in the city center, while the negative emotions have a more spread character and actually reach out more distant areas. We also see from the figures in the legend that the intensity of the emotions of joy and positive surprise are much more bigger than those of the negative emotions. This is, of course, connected with the real number of the emoji which we have received. But also it is talkative argument or information about the nature of the localization of the positive emotion, which is really times higher in the city center. And also in some remote areas, such as these parks or this park in the non-central areas of St. Petersburg. And how to see the structure of the city behind a heat map. Of course, we see the spatial distribution, but how do we actually understand how the people go and receive this emotional experience when they are in the city? For this kind of procedure, we have been using the space syntax toolkit and the space syntax logics, which have been elaborated in 1970s by Space Syntax Lab in the Part Lab. So actually, the construction of the emotional street networks was going like this. We have raw point emotional data, which is the emotional marks, emoticons, placed by the users of Empresa T platform, which we are visualizing here using QGIS software. Afterwards, we are connecting the neighboring points with points to path algorithm, and the logic under this is that the connected dots are actually the dots within the pedestrian accessibility, which for here is several hundred meters. You see the nearest neighbor index and observed mean distance here. More or less, they're under they're under 100 meters in the city center and a bit more in the city periphery, where the density of the dots is less. But this representation is not the natural representation for how the people use the city, because the people do not actually walk across the streets or the buildings or the channels without the bridges. So this layer was actually collated with the layer of the real road network, street network, received from OpenStreetMap data, which is a bank of open geographical data really representative for St. Petersburg because it is crowdsourced, and the community of OpenStreetMappers is quite big in our city. And after the collation of these two layers, we have received this kind of representation. So we have taken those emotional marks which were really collocated with the streets. And this referred to the fact that we have taken only those emotional marks which were put down for the streets, not for the inner courtyards or for the interior squares of the buildings. So all of these things we have run in QGIS software, and after collating and receiving this layer, we have been visualizing it and analyzing it with Space Syntax plugin in QGIS. What actually we have received is the following two maps, which are representing the emotional networks of positive emotions and of negative emotions. Here you can see at a glance that a positive street network of St. Petersburg is much more connected and integrated than the negative one, which is having these different kinds of clots at the peripheral areas of the city. The positive street network has this pronounced heart of interconnected streets, while the negative network has like several arteries which are more or less interconnected. And just to mention it, that here we have the legend that the red color is those streets with maximum connectivity in the network. To conclude with this comparison, I would like also to mention that all of these networks, well, both networks, positive and negative street network, they are having a pronounced center periphery hierarchical structure, meaning that the most connected streets are located in the city center, while the least connected are in the city periphery. And also what is particular here is that this interconnected heart is actually giving growth to the arteries which are going in fourth directions of the city. And I will show you a bit later these arteries. They're not much connected, but they are giving this emotional experience way to the remote areas of the city. And this concerns the positive street network. As for the negative one, there is some movement, interconnected emotional movement to the south. However, to the north, there is less movement in terms of emotional flow along the city streets. Looking in closer, I would like to highlight once again that the city, that the positive network really has its heart and really interconnected one in the city center, which goes along the numerous embankments which we are having here because of the island structure of the city. And these embankments are interconnected within by the tertiary streets actually, but which are really beautiful architecturally and which are really full of cultural attractions. So this heart is sort of best representation of emotional experience pronounced by the people themselves, reported by the users of Empresa T. And of course, this is not something which was too unexpected. Really, most of the attractions are located in this parts of the city center. But of course, it is in a way interesting to see that, for example, this part is not as positive as it could be. This is Nevsky Avenue, which is like the main artery and the main cultural and business street of St. Petersburg. And so to the south of it, to the south east, we see this positive emotional experience happening, and contrary to the northwest, we are not seeing this happening. And this is really so because here we are having the areas which are mentally not that well perceived by the people, though they are in the city center. And I would like also to highlight again about this specific clots of negative emotions, which are somehow clustered down and located in some tight areas in the periphery. So these clots are not spreading out, which is a good thing, good news for city dwellers and urban developers. And also it is interesting for urban planners to see that there are some natural borders for natural or artificial borders for negative experiences to happen. For example, these are negative streets which are facing where people are facing heavy traffic or uncontrolled pedestrian flows or inconvenient crossings or too many crowd and noise. This is what we know from the comments which people leave, users of Empresa T leave, together with their emotional remarks. So these crossings, if really these areas, if really maintained better, could be somehow reduced, and so the negative experience won't spread out. And here I would like to show a bit of the figures which can be calculated using space syntax tool. One is the connectivity index, and here you see the definition of the connectivity index. This is the measure which gives the index, which shows the connectivity of the street to its immediate neighbors, the streets. And in terms of emotional street network, it is not only a structural measure, but also a measure showing that if you are in the maximum connected street, you are about to see and to face other streets with emotional experience of a certain type. So, for example, when you are at Nevsky Avenue, you are at the place, at the street where you can face the most of the positive experience, even when you are going off the Nevsky and turning somewhere to the right or to the left. So here you see the ratings of the positive and the negative street networks. And there are some interesting points around here. The first one is, of course, that Nevsky Avenue is in the head of the both ratings. other one is that in the positive street network, the most connected streets, we have embankments mostly, and also the pedestrian streets and streets with bar culture. So in total, these streets, which are most positive and providing also access to the to other most positive streets, are most touristic walkable streets and streets facing the natural environment. When we are looking at the rating of the negative street network, we are actually seeing that here we are facing the mostly used and the heaviest in terms of traffic avenues, which are at the same time arteries connecting different parts of the city together. For example, Nevsky Avenue, Obvodny Channel, Moskovsky Avenue, and other avenues. And also some of the streets are not that long, but as Sadovaya or Apraksin Lane or Griftsova Street, but are located in an area next to big market, and also an area which used to be quite messy and dirty, let's say, with many intercultural groups or ethnic minorities, and is perceived as a not pleasant place even after it has been rebuilt according to one of the urban transformation plans. And this is a quite quick glimpse into the content of different mostly connected positive and negative streets in terms of their functional load. Already pronounced, but I would like to repeat again that the mostly connected streets are also those mostly connected positive streets are also those where the majority of the touristic attractors are located. Again, this data comes from OpenStreetMap data, and here we see the majority of attractions such as artworks and monuments and galleries and museums and some thematic parks and other natural zones. And really, in terms of the functional load, these are places number one for tourists and for city dwellers. And as for the negative emotional network, there is picture which is quite the contrary. For example, the Obvodny Channel, which is one of the most connected negative streets and places, is really a former industrial site with many architecture of industrial epoch and buildings, unfortunately abandoned nowadays, and also with not so many green places, and also with heavy traffic, and also with not good ecological and ecological and natural conditions. For example, a lot of dust in the air, making it hard to breathe. So the perception of this place in terms of emotions is really not so good. Also, I would like to highlight that some of the similar streets are reappearing in both of the networks. This is the Nevsky Avenue and the Moskovsky Avenue. This is really particular thing in terms of working with emotional data to see how the streets are both perceived negatively and positively. And this is to go with the fact that these streets are mostly used, are heavily used by people actually on a daily basis, or by many many groups of people living, for example, in the south of the city. So this is not the fact itself that the street is bad or good, but the fact of its usage, which actually makes the street go in both of the ratings. And also another figure and another index which shows the other side of the coin is the integration index, which is a normalized measure of distance from any space of origin to all others, which is a global measure of depth of the structure of the city. So it is not the immediate neighbors which are connected to the street, but its overall connectivity to all others, or the variety of such a connectivity. And we do not see that the situation has changed so much, but there is one newcomer into the group, which is the Kamenostrovsky Avenue, which is an avenue going along one of the biggest central areas, Petrogradsky Island. And we see a missing street from the previous rating, which is the Sredny Avenue of Vasilievsky Island, which is now missing in terms of the connectivity of the integration, and sorry, in the negative street network. But actually the situation is pretty much the same, and we see it's quite stable and could be expected actually from what we have seen so far in the connectivity maps. Nevsky again is the leader, which actually makes this street really the number one street, the representation, not only mental but also emotional for the whole of St. Petersburg. So coming to conclusions, I would like to highlight that both of the street networks, negative and positive ones, have central periphery hierarchical structure, which is quite interesting in terms of analysis of urban planning structure of the city. For example, if we would not face this and would face a multi-central structure of emotions, this would tell us a lot. So the positive street network is more centrally localized and connected, and the negative is more dispersed with a few negative clusters in the city periphery. Positive streets contain beautiful architecture, points of interest, sites, and are also rated highly in different ratings such as TripAdvisor. And negative streets are mostly transit areas with heavy traffic and bad pedestrian regulation, noise and crowd. Streets which are main public arteries such as Nevsky Avenue, Moskovsky Avenue, some others are included in both networks. And as I said, Nevsky Avenue is the most connected and integrated street, and is really a landmark in this case for our city. In terms of applications, these considerations could be used, this kind of analysis could be used for detecting available emotional routes for pedestrians and tourists in any kind of any part of the city. It depends only on the volume of data. These results are also allowed to understand the items of the built environment, which bring in the potential for positive emotion, and also which could intensify positive emotional experience. And of course, those objects which or peculiarities of the urban environment which are bringing bad experiences and should be eliminated. And this kind of analysis shows us the locations, certain locations, which could be connected for more emotional flow. For example, certain streets which could connect to other streets which are already emotionally perceived and which could be charged emotionally, would create a bridge in between emotionally charged streets and would eventually create an emotional cluster, which is great in terms of emotional well-being of the citizens and, of course, in terms of the livability of the whole city. And the last but not least, the discussion section. I would like to mention that, of course, more graph analysis should be done on different levels of the street network. And of course, it is never too much data. So the original OpenStreetMap network can be completed with more information about the non-official paths, such as shortcuts, and the field work, which we are doing now, can be done again with more detail on different nodes and links of these emotional networks of the streets, both positive and negative, to explore more the nature of emotions along the city streets, which can be, of course, of different origin. For example, seeing something on the way or staying in some places along the street are practices which bring in emotions of different origins, such as dynamic feelings and some stationary conditions. So thank you, and I will be glad to hear your considerations and questions and suggestions at our section. And also looking forward to meet you actually today at 2 p.m. Thank you so much.